Boarding: a lesson in humility. The midday sun hung high over the sprawling international airport, casting long shadows across the bustling terminal. Inside, travelers hurried about, some dragging overstuffed luggage, others clutching coffee cups and boarding passes. Among the crowd was Marcus Daniels, a 32-year-old black man with a calm but confident demeanor. Unlike most passengers, Marcus wasn't here for leisure or business in the conventional sense. Today, he was embarking on a unique mission given to him by his father, Harold Daniels, the owner and founder of Skyline Airlines, one of the country's leading carriers. Harold Daniels was a man of vision and discipline. Having built Skyline Airlines from scratch, he believed in understanding every facet of his business. Now in his late 60s, Harold was grooming Marcus to take over the company. But Harold had a rule. Before you could lead, you had to understand the people you were leading. That meant Marcus needed to experience the airline, not as an executive or a privileged insider, but as an ordinary passenger. You can't fix what you don't see, Harold had told him over dinner a week ago. And sometimes, the only way to see the truth is to walk in someone else's shoes. Marcus had grown up around wealth, but his father had instilled in him a deep sense of humility. Harold had made sure Marcus understood the value of hard work and respect for others, regardless of their status. Today's flight wasn't just about fulfilling his father's request. It was about testing the values his father had worked so hard to teach him. The boarding gate. Marcus approached gate 17, ticket in hand. He was dressed casually but impeccably, a tailored navy blazer over a simple white t-shirt, paired with dark jeans and polished loafers. He carried a single leather duffel bag slung over his shoulder. To most, he looked like a successful young professional, though his understated outfit didn't scream wealth or status. The gate agent, Rachel Simmons, stood behind the counter, scanning tickets with practiced efficiency. Rachel had worked for Skyline Airlines for over a decade. Her crisp uniform and polished smile gave her an air of professionalism, but beneath that facade lay a rigid set of biases she had never been forced to confront. When Marcus handed her his first-class ticket, Rachel's eyes flicked up and down, quickly assessing him. There was a brief pause, a barely noticeable furrow of her brow, before she plastered on her professional smile. "First class is boarding now," she said, her tone neutral but cool. Marcus nodded, thanked her, and walked toward the jet bridge. Behind him, Rachel exchanged a look with her coworker, her lips tightening. "Guess first class is getting pretty casual these days," she muttered under her breath. Her coworker gave her a warning glance, but Rachel shrugged it off. Settling into first class. The first-class cabin was everything one would expect from a premium airline: wide leather seats, ample legroom, and a serene ambience. Marcus found his seat, 2A, near the window. He placed his bag in the overhead compartment and settled in, glancing around to take in the atmosphere. Most of the passengers were business executives or well-dressed travelers who exuded the quiet confidence of seasoned flyers. Marcus leaned back, trying to focus on the purpose of his trip. His father wanted him to observe everything: the service, the comfort, the interactions between staff and passengers. "Pay attention to the details," Harold had said. "That's where you'll find the real story." As the boarding process continued, Marcus noticed Rachel step into the cabin to assist with seating. When her eyes landed on him, a flicker of confusion crossed her face. It was brief, but Marcus caught it. She quickly composed herself, though her demeanor shifted. Her smile disappeared, replaced by a polite but distant expression. When Rachel approached his seat, she hesitated. "Can I see your ticket again, sir?" she asked, her voice laced with subtle skepticism. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but complied, handing her his boarding pass. Rachel studied it for a moment longer than necessary before handing it back. "Everything seems to be in order," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Thanks," Marcus replied, his voice calm but firm. He maintained eye contact, refusing to let her dismissiveness rattle him. The uneasy start. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Marcus tried to relax. He had flown countless times before, but this flight felt different. The subtle tension in Rachel's behavior was hard to ignore. It wasn't overt, but it was there, in the way she avoided addressing him directly, in the slightly clipped tone of her voice when she did speak to him, and in the way her attention lingered on him just a little too long, as though she were trying to figure out what he was doing in first class. The other flight attendants, by contrast, treated him with the same polite professionalism they extended to all passengers. Marcus couldn't help but wonder if Rachel's attitude was personal, or if it reflected deeper biases she hadn't confronted. The dinner service incident. The flight had been airborne for about an hour when dinner service began. Marcus watched as Rachel moved through the cabin, her demeanor warm and accommodating with the other passengers. When she reached Marcus, however, her tone shifted. "Here's your meal," she said, placing the tray down with a thud. She didn't make eye contact and walked away without offering him silverware or asking if he needed anything else. Marcus stared at the tray for a moment, his frustration growing. He raised his hand to call her back. "Excuse me, Rachel," he said, his voice calm but firm. Rachel turned, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes?" she asked, though her tone betrayed a flicker of irritation. "You forgot the silverware," Marcus said evenly. Rachel hesitated, then retrieved a set of utensils from her cart and handed them to him without a word. As she turned to leave, Marcus caught the curious glances of other passengers. Some looked uncomfortable, while others seemed amused. The moment was brief, but it lingered in Marcus's mind, reflecting on the experience. As the flight continued, Marcus found himself grappling with a mix of emotions. He had come on this journey to learn, to see the airline through the eyes of a passenger. But Rachel's behavior was a stark reminder of the prejudices that still existed, even in places that prided themselves on professionalism and inclusivity. He thought about his father, about the lessons Harold had tried to teach him over the years. "People will show you who they are when they think no one is watching," Harold had once said. Marcus realized that Rachel's behavior wasn't just a personal affront. It was a reflection of a broader issue that needed to be addressed. By the time the flight began its descent, Marcus had made a decision. He wouldn't let this experience go unnoticed. His father had taught him that leadership wasn't just about making decisions from a boardroom. It was about confronting challenges head-on and creating change where it was needed most. A quiet resolve. As the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, Marcus felt a sense of clarity. He had started this journey as an observer, but he now understood that he had a responsibility to act. Rachel's behavior wasn't just about her. It was about the culture that allowed such biases to go unchecked. Marcus gathered his belongings and prepared to deplane, his mind already formulating a plan. He didn't know exactly how he would address the situation, but he knew one thing for certain: change was coming. Little did Rachel know, the man she had dismissed and humiliated wasn't just another passenger. He was someone with the power to make a difference, and he intended to do just that. The encounter continues. The aircraft hummed steadily as it soared through the clouds, leaving behind the airport and the world of assumptions and appearances that Rachel Simmons had brought on board. Marcus Daniels, seated in 2A, leaned back and closed his eyes. Though he wasn't relaxed, Rachel's behavior gnawed at him, not because he wasn't accustomed to encountering prejudice, but because he hadn't expected to see it so blatantly displayed in a place his father had poured his heart and soul into building. As the flight attendants began their in-air service, Marcus decided to focus on observing everything around him. His father's words echoed in his mind. "You can't fix what you don't see." Rachel's condescension was just one part of the equation. How the rest of the crew interacted with passengers, how the service was delivered, and even how passengers treated one another would paint a fuller picture of the airline's strengths and weaknesses. Rachel's pattern of behavior. Rachel, meanwhile, was busy in the aisle, addressing the needs of the other first-class passengers. Her demeanor was markedly different when interacting with them. She offered warm smiles, quick service, and frequent check-ins, ensuring they had everything they needed. Marcus watched as she stopped at the seat across from him, where an older gentleman in a sharp suit requested another glass of champagne. "Of course, sir," Rachel replied, her voice dripping with warmth. She returned with the champagne within seconds, even offering to adjust the man's seat to make him more comfortable. When she walked past Marcus, however, her demeanor shifted. Her eyes avoided his, and she didn't bother asking if he needed anything. It was as though she had decided he didn't exist, or worse, that he didn't matter. Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself to remain calm. He had come on this flight to learn, not to lose his temper. Still, Rachel's behavior was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. A small act of kindness. As the dinner service began, another flight attendant named Emily stopped by Marcus's seat. Emily was younger, probably in her mid-20s, with a kind smile and an air of professionalism that stood in stark contrast to Rachel's attitude. "Mr. Daniels, would you like something to drink with your meal?" Emily asked, her tone polite and friendly. Marcus smiled back, grateful for the change in tone. "Just water, please." "Thank you." Emily returned quickly with a glass of water, setting it on his tray with care. She even took a moment to check if he needed anything else before moving on to the next passenger. Marcus noted the difference in treatment, not just between Rachel and Emily, but also in how small acts of kindness could make a passenger feel valued. Rachel's next move. Rachel, however, wasn't done. As Emily finished her rounds, Rachel reappeared, standing near Marcus's seat with a clipboard in hand. Her eyes flicked to his tray, then back to him. "Mr. Daniels," she began, her tone clipped, "I just wanted to confirm your meal preference. It seems there was a mix-up with the options." Marcus raised an eyebrow. He had already received his meal, and there was no mix-up as far as he could tell. "I believe everything is fine," he said calmly, glancing at his tray. Rachel hesitated, as though searching for a reason to extend the conversation. "Well, if you need anything, let us know," she said finally, her voice lacking the sincerity she showed to other passengers. Marcus simply nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel's behavior was more than just a personal bias. She seemed determined to make him feel out of place, as though she couldn't reconcile his presence in first class with her preconceived notions of who belonged there. The observant passengers. Marcus wasn't the only one noticing Rachel's behavior. A middle-aged woman seated diagonally across from him had been watching the interactions closely. Dressed in a smart pantsuit and carrying herself with quiet confidence, she seemed to pick up on the subtle but undeniable tension between Rachel and Marcus. At one point, the woman caught Marcus's eye and offered him a small, knowing smile. Marcus nodded in acknowledgement, silently grateful for the unspoken solidarity. It was a reminder that not everyone shared Rachel's biases and that allies could be found in unexpected places. The turning point. As the flight continued, Marcus decided to focus on his purpose for being there. He pulled out a notebook and began jotting down his observations. The quality of the service, the demeanor of the crew, and the overall experience of flying first class. His notes were detailed and thoughtful, capturing both the positives and the areas for improvement. When Rachel passed by again, she glanced at the notebook, her curiosity piqued. "Working on something important?" she asked, her tone carrying the hint of sarcasm. Marcus looked up, his expression calm but firm. "Just taking notes," he replied. "It's always good to reflect on experiences." Rachel didn't respond, but her lips tightened as she walked away. Marcus wondered if she was beginning to sense that there was more to him than met the eye. The call home. Later in the flight, as the cabin lights dimmed and most passengers settled in for the evening, Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed his father's number. Harold Daniels answered on the second ring. "Hey, Dad," Marcus said quietly, mindful of the other passengers. "I'm on the flight." "How's it going so far?" Harold asked, his voice warm but curious. Marcus hesitated, considering how much to reveal. "It's been enlightening," he said finally. "The service is good overall, but there are definitely some areas that need attention." Harold chuckled. "I had a feeling you'd say that. Pay attention to the details, son," They'll tell you everything you need to know. I am, Marcus assured him. But I think this experience is about more than just the airline. It's about how people treat one another and what that says about the culture we've built. Harold was silent for a moment, then said, "That's a lesson worth learning. Keep your eyes open, and don't let one person's behavior overshadow the bigger picture." Marcus nodded, even though his father couldn't see him. "I won't," he promised. The uneasy quiet. As the flight neared its destination, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin grew quieter. Most passengers were dozing or watching movies, and the flight attendants had finished their rounds. Marcus took the opportunity to reflect on everything he had observed. Rachel's behavior was a glaring example of the biases that still existed, even in spaces that claimed to be inclusive. But it wasn't just about her. It was about the systems and cultures that allowed such behavior to go unchecked. Marcus realized that addressing the issue would require more than just confronting Rachel. It would require a deeper examination of the airline's values and practices, a quiet resolve. By the time the plane began its descent, Marcus had made up his mind. He wouldn't let this experience end with the flight. His father had always taught him that leadership was about action, not just observation. If Skyline Airlines was going to live up to its promise of excellence, it needed to be a place where every passenger felt valued, regardless of their background or appearance. As the wheels touched down and the plane taxied to the gate, Marcus felt a sense of clarity. He had come on this flight as a student, but he was leaving it with a mission. Rachel Simmons didn't know it yet, but her actions had sparked a fire that would lead to meaningful change. Little did she realize, the man she had dismissed wasn't just another passenger. He was someone with the power and the determination to ensure that her behavior would not go unnoticed. A lesson takes flight. As the plane taxied to its gate, Marcus Daniels remained seated, observing the subtle interactions around him. He noticed the way Rachel Simmons, the flight attendant who had been dismissive and condescending toward him throughout the flight, was now moving through the first-class cabin, her demeanor still warm and attentive, but only toward certain passengers. To others, including Marcus, she remained curt and indifferent. Marcus wasn't angry, he was thoughtful. His father's words from their last conversation before the flight echoed in his mind. To lead, you have to see things from the ground up. Pay attention to what people do when they think no one's watching. That's when you'll learn the truth. Marcus had seen enough during this flight to recognize that while Skyline Airlines prided itself on luxury and inclusivity, there were cracks in the foundation. Cracks that his father would expect him to address. To planning and more assumptions. When the seatbelt sign dinged off, the passengers in first class began gathering their belongings. Rachel stood by the front door, offering cheerful goodbyes to each person as they exited the cabin. Her tone was effusive with some, especially the older white businessman who had occupied the seat next to Marcus. "Have a wonderful day, sir," she said, smiling broadly. When it was Marcus's turn to exit, her tone dropped several notches. "Thanks for flying with us," she said flatly, her eyes briefly meeting his before flicking away. Marcus nodded, offering her a polite "thank you," before stepping into the jet bridge. Behind him, he could feel the weight of her gaze, as though she were still trying to figure out who he was and why he had been seated in first class. Little did Rachel know that Marcus was about to turn the tables, and not out of malice, but to teach a lesson that would resonate far beyond this one flight. The quiet meeting. After stepping into the terminal, Marcus headed to one of Skyline Airlines' executive lounges. This wasn't part of his original plan. He had intended to fly under the radar, experience the airline like any other passenger, and save his observations for a private conversation with his father later. But Rachel's behavior had stuck with him, and Marcus felt compelled to address it while the memory was still fresh. Inside the lounge, Marcus made a quick call to his father's executive assistant, Cynthia, who managed everything from Harold's schedule to the smallest operational details of the airline. Cynthia picked up immediately, her professional yet warm voice coming through clearly. "Cynthia, it's Marcus," he said. "I just landed from flight 247, and I need your help." Of course, Marcus, Cynthia replied. What do you need? I need the lead flight attendant from this flight to join me in the executive lounge for a brief meeting. Can you arrange that? Cynthia didn't hesitate. Consider it done. Give me 10 minutes. Marcus hung up, feeling a mix of anticipation and responsibility. He wasn't looking to humiliate Rachel or start a confrontation. He wanted to create a moment of reflection, not just for her, but for everyone who might be affected by the culture her behavior represented. Rachel's surprise. Back on the plane, Rachel was finishing her post-flight duties when her supervisor approached her. Rachel, you're needed in the executive lounge, the supervisor said. Rachel frowned, puzzled. Me? Why? I'm not sure, but it's coming from the top, the supervisor replied, his tone serious. You should head over immediately. Rachel nodded, her mind racing. The executive lounge was typically reserved for high-profile passengers, VIPs, and senior airline staff. Why would she, a flight attendant, be summoned there? As Rachel made her way to the lounge, she couldn't help but think back to the passengers in first class. Had someone complained? Her thoughts lingered on Marcus, the casually dressed black man she had dismissed as an outsider. She quickly shook the thought away. No, it couldn't be him. He was nobody important, she told herself. When she arrived at the lounge, Rachel was greeted by Cynthia, who led her to a private conference room. Inside, Marcus was seated at the head of the table, his demeanor calm and composed. Rachel hesitated, confusion etched on her face. Please, take a seat, Marcus said, gesturing to the chair across from him. The conversation. Rachel sat down, her professional mask firmly in place. I was told you wanted to speak with me, she said, her voice steady but cautious. Yes, Marcus replied. Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Marcus Daniels. I'm the son of Harold Daniels, the founder and CEO of Skyline Airlines. Rachel's eyes widened, the realization hitting her like a wave. Her carefully constructed composure faltered for a moment before she recovered. I didn't know, she stammered. Marcus raised a hand, signaling for her to stop. That's exactly the point, he said. You didn't know, and you treated me differently because of it. Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but Marcus continued. Throughout the flight, I observed how you interacted with passengers. Your service to most of them was excellent, warm, attentive, professional. But when it came to me, your attitude shifted. You were dismissive, curt, and at times, outright condescending. Rachel's face flushed, but Marcus's tone remained calm. I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad. I'm telling you this because your behavior reflects something larger, a culture that allows biases to go unchecked. You assumed I didn't belong in first class because of how I looked. You judged me before you knew anything about me. Rachel's hands fidgeted in her lap, her confidence eroding under Marcus's steady gaze. Mr. Daniels, I didn't mean any harm. I was just. Let me stop you there, Marcus said gently, but firmly. Intentions matter, but so do actions. Whether you meant harm or not, your behavior sent a message that I didn't belong, that I wasn't worthy of the same respect you showed to other passengers. A lesson in accountability. Rachel sat in silence, absorbing Marcus's words. She had never been confronted like this before, and the experience was both humbling and eye-opening. She realized that her actions, no matter how subtle, had the power to affect others in ways she hadn't considered. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his tone softening. Rachel, this isn't about punishment. It's about accountability. I need you to understand the impact of your actions, not just for me, but for every passenger who might feel the way I felt today. Rachel nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. I understand. And I'm sorry. Marcus gave a small nod. I appreciate that. But words alone won't fix this. What will you do differently moving forward? Rachel hesitated, then said, I'll be more mindful of my assumptions. I'll treat every passenger with the respect they deserve, regardless of appearances. That's a start, Marcus replied. "And I'll be following up to make sure that happens, not just with you, but with the entire airline." The ripple effect. When Rachel left the meeting, she felt a mix of emotions: embarrassment, regret, and a newfound determination to change. The experience had been humbling, but it had also been a turning point. She realized that her behavior didn't just reflect poorly on her, it reflected on the airline as a whole. For Marcus, the meeting was just the beginning. He knew that creating lasting change would require more than one conversation. It would require systemic shifts in training, culture, and accountability. But as he left the lounge, he felt confident that he had taken the first step, a call to action. Later that evening, Marcus called his father to recount the events of the day. Harold listened carefully, his voice filled with pride when he finally spoke. "You handled that well, son," he said. "Leadership isn't about tearing people down. It's about helping them grow. And that's exactly what you did." Marcus smiled, feeling the weight of his father's words. "Thanks, Dad. But there's still work to do." "There always is," Harold replied. "But you've already started the change, and that's what matters." As Marcus ended the call, he thought about the journey ahead. Rachel's behavior had been a symptom of a larger issue, but it was also an opportunity. A chance to build a culture of respect and inclusivity, one interaction at a time. And Marcus was ready to lead the way. The spark of change. The days following Marcus Daniels' confrontation with Rachel Simmons brought a flurry of activity to Skyline Airlines. The incident had left a lasting impression on Marcus, and he realized that addressing Rachel's behavior was only the tip of the iceberg. If his father's airline was going to live up to its reputation as a company that valued every passenger equally, systemic change was necessary. As Marcus sat in his father's sprawling office overlooking the city, he shared his thoughts with Harold Daniels. The elder Daniels, a man known for his sharp instincts and keen sense of justice, listened intently, his steely eyes locked on his son. "I've seen it before," Harold said, leaning back in his chair. "People making judgments based on appearance or assumptions. But we've worked hard to make Skyline a company that represents inclusion and equality. What you experience shows that we've still got work to do." Marcus nodded. "It's not just Rachel. It's about the culture we've created or allowed to develop. I don't think people like her even realize the harm they're causing. They think they're just following instincts or protocols, but those biases have real consequences." Harold stroked his chin thoughtfully. "So, what do you propose?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I think it's time we go deeper. Mandatory diversity and inclusion training, a clear code of conduct, and accountability measures for everyone, from flight attendants to the executives. But more than that, we need to listen to our employees and passengers. We need to know where we're falling short." Harold smiled, pride evident in his expression. "That's leadership, son. Let's make it happen." Laying the groundwork. The first step in Marcus's plan was to assess the current state of the airline's culture. He and a team of executives organized a series of focus groups with employees at all levels of the company, from flight attendants to baggage handlers to senior management. Marcus insisted on attending every session, not as an authority figure, but as a listener. In one session, a young flight attendant named Priya shared her experiences. "I've seen it happen before," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "Passengers who look different, whether it's their skin color, their clothing, or even their accents, get treated differently. It's not always intentional, but it's there." Another employee, an older maintenance worker named Frank, chimed in. "It's not just the passengers, either. Some of us feel it too. If you're not in a high-visibility role, people think your voice doesn't matter." Marcus took meticulous notes, his resolve deepening with every story he heard. The sessions confirmed what he had suspected. The biases weren't just individual, they were systemic, woven into the fabric of the company's operations. The Rachel factor. While Marcus and his team worked on their broader initiatives, Rachel Simmons was undergoing her own transformation. The meeting with Marcus had shaken her to her core, forcing her to confront biases she hadn't even realized she held. Rachel had always prided herself on her professionalism, but Marcus's words had made her see that professionalism wasn't just about doing the job. It was about how you treated people. For days after the meeting, she replayed the conversation in her mind, her embarrassment giving way to determination. She began researching on her own, reading about implicit bias and the impact of microaggressions. She sought advice from colleagues she trusted, asking for honest feedback about her behavior. To her surprise, several of them admitted they had noticed her tendency to treat certain passengers differently, though they had never called her out on it. "I want to do better," Rachel told her supervisor during a private meeting. "Not just because of what happened with Mr. Daniels, but because it's the right thing to do." Her supervisor, impressed by Rachel's willingness to change, recommended her for the company's upcoming pilot program on diversity and inclusion. Rachel accepted without hesitation, eager to prove, not just to Marcus, but to herself, that she could grow. The pilot program. The Diversity and Inclusion Program was Marcus's brainchild, developed in collaboration with industry experts and civil rights advocates. The pilot program included interactive workshops, role-playing exercises, and open discussions designed to challenge biases and foster empathy. Rachel was one of the first participants. The workshops were eye-opening, forcing her to confront not only her own assumptions, but also the ways in which those assumptions had shaped her actions. In one exercise, participants were asked to role-play scenarios where they had to navigate interactions with people from different backgrounds. "I never realized how much I was projecting my own biases onto others," Rachel admitted during one session. "I thought I was being professional, but I wasn't seeing the person in front of me. I was seeing my assumptions about them." Her vulnerability earned her respect from her peers, many of whom shared their own struggles with unlearning biases. The program didn't just change Rachel. It created a ripple effect, inspiring others to reflect on their own behavior. The passengers speak. While the employee program was underway, Marcus turned his attention to the passengers. He launched an anonymous survey asking customers to share their experiences with Skyline Airlines. The responses poured in, some glowing with praise, others filled with constructive criticism. One response stood out to Marcus. It came from an older black woman who described an incident on a previous flight where she had been made to feel unwelcome in first class. "I didn't say anything at the time," she wrote, "because I didn't think anyone would listen. But reading about your efforts gives me hope." The comment reaffirmed Marcus's commitment to creating a culture of accountability and respect. He realized that the changes they were implementing weren't just about preventing incidents like his own. They were about giving people a voice and showing them they mattered. Rachel's redemption. A few weeks later, Marcus boarded another Skyline flight, this time as a passenger without an agenda. To his surprise, Rachel Simmons was part of the crew. When she saw him, her face flushed, but instead of avoiding him, she approached with a determined expression. "Mr. Daniels," she said, her voice steady but sincere, "I just wanted to say thank you. What you said to me, it opened my eyes. I've been working on changing, and I hope my actions will speak louder than my words." Marcus studied her for a moment, then smiled. "I appreciate that, Rachel. Change isn't easy, but it's worth it." Throughout the flight, Rachel went out of her way to ensure every passenger felt valued. Her interactions were warm, attentive, and genuine. Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, not just in Rachel, but in the journey they had all embarked on together. The ripple effect. By the end of the quarter, Skyline Airlines had rolled out its diversity and inclusion program company-wide. The initiative was met with overwhelming support, not just from employees, but also from passengers who noticed the difference in service and culture. Marcus's efforts didn't go unnoticed. Industry publications praised Skyline for its leadership, and other airlines began reaching out to learn from their example. Harold Daniels, ever the proud father, took Marcus aside during a board meeting. "You've done something extraordinary," Harold said. "This isn't just about fixing one problem. It's about creating a legacy." and I couldn't be prouder." Marcus smiled, humbled by his father's words. I had a good teacher. Looking ahead, as Skyline Airlines continued to evolve, Marcus knew there was still work to be done. Culture wasn't something you changed overnight. It was something you built, piece by piece, through every decision, every interaction, and every moment of accountability. But as he looked around, at the employees who were now champions for inclusion, at the passengers who felt seen and valued, and at Rachel Simmons, who had become an advocate for change, Marcus felt hopeful. They were building something better, something stronger. And for Marcus, that was worth every challenge they had faced along the way. The ripple becomes a wave. The implementation of Skyline Airlines' diversity and inclusion program sent shockwaves throughout the aviation industry. It wasn't just a memo passed down from executives. It was a cultural overhaul, a commitment to change that permeated every corner of the company. For Marcus Daniels, it was gratifying to see the seeds of transformation begin to grow, but he knew the work was far from over. The employees' transformation. Within weeks of the program's rollout, stories began trickling in from employees across the company. A flight attendant named Priya shared her experience during a training session. I didn't realize how often I was making assumptions based on first impressions. Now I find myself pausing, asking questions, and getting to know people beyond what I see. Another employee, a customer service agent named Kevin, recounted how the training had helped him handle a difficult interaction. A passenger had arrived late and was frustrated about missing their flight. Kevin's old approach would have been defensive, but the training encouraged him to listen actively and empathize. By the end of our conversation, the passenger wasn't just calm. They thanked me for my patience. The stories weren't limited to frontline staff. In a meeting with the executive team, Marcus heard from managers who had started reevaluating their hiring practices, mentoring programs, and even internal promotions. "This isn't just about passengers," said Angela, the head of human resources. "It's about building an environment where every employee feels valued." The changes weren't just surface level. They were creating a ripple effect that touched every aspect of Skyline's operations. Rachel's redemption arc. Rachel Simmons was perhaps the most unexpected success story of the diversity initiative. After her confrontation with Marcus, she had thrown herself into the program, determined to prove that she could change. She sought out additional training, volunteered to mentor new hires, and even became a spokesperson for the airline's inclusion efforts. During a quarterly town hall meeting, Rachel stood before hundreds of employees, sharing her story. "I used to think professionalism meant treating everyone the same, but I've learned that fairness doesn't always mean sameness. It means recognizing and respecting the unique stories and struggles that each person brings with them." Her honesty resonated with the audience. Employees approached her afterward, thanking her for her vulnerability and courage. Marcus, watching from the back of the room, felt a swell of pride. Rachel's journey was proof that change was possible, not just for individuals, but for entire organizations. Passengers take notice. As Skyline's culture evolved, passengers began to notice the difference. Surveys showed a significant uptick in customer satisfaction, with many noting the improved service and welcoming atmosphere. Social media posts praising the airline started to go viral. One post, in particular, caught Marcus's attention. A Black woman named Alicia had shared her experience on a recent Skyline flight. "For the first time in years, I felt seen and respected as a first-class passenger. The crew went out of their way to make me feel welcome, and it was clear they genuinely cared. Whatever you're doing, at Skyline Airlines, keep it up." Marcus forwarded the post to his father, adding a simple note: "This is what it's all about." Challenges along the way. Of course, the transformation wasn't without its challenges. Some employees resisted the changes, claiming they were unnecessary or too political. Others felt uncomfortable confronting their own biases, retreating into defensiveness instead of engaging with the training. During a meeting with department heads, Marcus addressed the resistance head-on. "Change is uncomfortable," he said, his voice steady but firm. "But discomfort is where growth happens. If we're serious about creating a better skyline, we need to lean into that discomfort, not shy away from it. One department head, a veteran pilot named Captain Richards, raised his hand. "Marcus, I've been flying for this airline for over 25 years. I'm not saying I disagree with the program, but how do we measure its success? How do we know we're making a real impact?" Marcus appreciated the question. "That's a fair point, Captain. Success isn't just about numbers, it's about stories. It's about the passenger who feels safe and respected. It's about the employee who feels empowered to speak up. But we'll also measure success through tangible outcomes: improved customer satisfaction, lower employee turnover, and a stronger reputation in the industry." The answer seemed to satisfy Richards, and over time, even the skeptics began to see the value of the changes. The boardroom reckoning. Despite the positive momentum, Marcus knew the ultimate test of the program's success would come during Skyline's quarterly board meeting. The board members, a mix of longtime allies and cautious observers, would want to see concrete results. Marcus prepared meticulously, gathering data, testimonials, and success stories from across the company. On the day of the meeting, Marcus stood at the head of the long mahogany table, his presentation loaded onto the screen behind him. His father, Harold Daniels, sat at the far end, watching his son with quiet pride. Marcus began by sharing the results of the passenger surveys, highlighting the significant improvements in satisfaction scores. He followed with employee testimonials, showing how the program had changed not only behaviors, but also mindsets. Finally, he presented financial data, demonstrating how the improved culture had led to increased customer loyalty and higher revenues. One board member, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret, leaned forward. "Marcus, this is impressive," she said. "But I have to ask, how do we ensure this isn't just a temporary shift? How do we make these changes stick?" Marcus smiled. "By embedding them into our DNA," he replied. "We're not just changing policies, we're changing mindsets, and that requires ongoing commitment, from the top down and the bottom up." The board voted unanimously to expand the program, giving Marcus and his team the green light to take their efforts even further. Expanding the vision. With the board's support, Marcus launched the next phase of the initiative, a mentorship program that paired employees from different departments and backgrounds, fostering cross-cultural understanding and collaboration. He also worked with community organizations to recruit more diverse talent, ensuring that Skyline's workforce reflected the passengers it served. Rachel Simmons, now a leader in the mentorship program, took her role to heart. She personally mentored a young flight attendant named Malik, who reminded her of Marcus in his quiet determination and resilience. Under Rachel's guidance, Malik quickly rose through the ranks, becoming a model employee and an advocate for inclusion. The Daniels legacy. One evening, Marcus joined his father for dinner at Harold's home. Over a glass of wine, Harold raised a toast. "To you, son. You've taken this company to new heights." Marcus smiled, clinking his glass against his father's. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad. You laid the foundation. I'm just building on it." Harold shook his head. "No, Marcus. You've done more than build. You've transformed, and I couldn't be prouder." As they talked, Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been challenging, but it had also been rewarding in ways he hadn't anticipated. He wasn't just running an airline. He was shaping a culture, a legacy that would outlast them both. Looking ahead, as Skyline Airlines soared into the future, it became a beacon of what was possible when a company committed to change. Passengers chose the airline not just for its luxury, but for its humanity. Employees stayed not just for the paycheck, but for the sense of belonging. And Marcus Daniels, the young man who had started this journey as an observer, had become a leader in every sense of the word. The ripple had become a wave, and the wave showed no signs of slowing down. For Marcus, the journey wasn't over. But the view from above was breathtaking. A new skyline. As Skyline Airlines entered its next chapter, Marcus Daniels found himself reflecting on the journey that had led them here. The airline was no longer just a business or a family legacy. It had become a symbol of change, a testament to the power of facing uncomfortable truths and working to dismantle them. But as Marcus knew all too well, true leadership meant continuing to innovate and push forward, even when it felt like the battle was already won. A changing industry. The transformation at Skyline Airlines didn't go unnoticed. Industry analysts began referring to the airline as a pioneer of inclusivity, and articles in major publications praised its efforts to create a culture of respect and accountability. Passengers posted testimonials on social media, sharing how they felt seen and valued during their flights. Other airlines took note, with some reaching out to Marcus for advice on implementing similar programs. A senior executive from a rival airline even requested a meeting, admitting, "We've seen what you're doing, and frankly, we need to catch up." While the praise was gratifying, Marcus knew the changes at Skyline were still fragile. Cultural change isn't something you achieve once and move on. He told his team during a leadership retreat, "It's like flying. You have to keep adjusting, recalibrating, and making sure you stay on course." The meeting that changed everything. One day, Marcus received a call from Cynthia, his father's longtime executive assistant. "Marcus, you might want to clear your schedule," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "Your father has called for a special meeting with the executive team." When Marcus arrived at the headquarters boardroom, Harold Daniels was already seated, a thoughtful expression on his face. The rest of the leadership team trickled in, exchanging curious glances. Once everyone was settled, Harold stood and addressed the room. "Skyline has come a long way," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "What Marcus and all of you have done over the past few months has not only transformed this company, but also inspired an entire industry, and I think it's time we take this further." Harold paused, letting his words sink in. "I've decided to step down as CEO and officially pass the torch to Marcus." The room fell silent, the weight of Harold's announcement sinking in. Marcus, seated near the head of the table, felt a mix of pride, gratitude, and responsibility. His father had always been his greatest mentor, and now he was being entrusted with leading the company into its next era. "Thank you, Dad," Marcus said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I promise to honor the legacy you've built and to continue pushing this company forward." Taking the helm. As CEO, Marcus wasted no time building on the momentum Skyline had already achieved. One of his first major initiatives was the launch of a global campaign called Wings of Inclusion. The campaign highlighted stories from both passengers and employees, showcasing the diverse experiences that made Skyline unique. It included everything from a video series featuring employee journeys to partnerships with community organizations aimed at fostering inclusion in aviation. The campaign resonated deeply, attracting new passengers and employees alike. Applications for jobs at Skyline skyrocketed, with many citing the company's culture as their primary reason for applying. One young woman, an aspiring pilot, wrote in her application, "Skyline isn't just an airline. It's a movement. I want to be part of that." Rachel's next chapter. Rachel Simmons had undergone a transformation of her own. As one of the faces of the Wings of Inclusion campaign, she shared her story in a heartfelt video that aired during the launch. "I thought I was doing everything right," Rachel said in the video, her voice steady but emotional. "But I wasn't seeing people for who they truly were." Meeting Marcus made me realize that change starts with accountability. And I'm so grateful I was given the chance to grow. The video quickly went viral, with many viewers praising Rachel's honesty and vulnerability. She became a sought-after speaker at industry conferences, where she shared her journey and encouraged others to confront their own biases. But Rachel didn't stop there. She spearheaded Skyline's mentorship program, pairing employees from different backgrounds to foster understanding and collaboration. Under her leadership, the program flourished, becoming one of the most celebrated aspects of Skyline's culture. A sky full of voices. One of Marcus's most ambitious projects as CEO was the creation of a new initiative called Sky Voices. This program gave passengers a platform to share their feedback, stories, and ideas directly with the airline. Using an app developed in-house, passengers could submit videos, audio recordings, or written messages, all of which were reviewed by a dedicated team. The initiative uncovered countless stories, some uplifting, others heartbreaking, but all invaluable in shaping the airline's future. One submission came from a young boy who had flown with Skyline for his first family vacation. "I got to sit in the cockpit after the flight," he said in his video, holding up a signed photo from the pilots. "When I grow up, I want to be a pilot too." Another submission came from a passenger who shared how the airline had accommodated her wheelchair during a particularly challenging trip. "You made me feel like a person, not just a problem," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. These stories became the backbone of Skyline's marketing and internal training programs, reminding everyone, from the executives to the baggage handlers, why their work mattered. A legacy of leadership. As Skyline continued to thrive under Marcus's leadership, Harold Daniels watched from the sidelines with a sense of fulfillment. One evening, as the two of them sat on the patio of Harold's home, Marcus turned to his father. "Did you ever think we'd come this far?" Marcus asked, his voice tinged with wonder. Harold smiled, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I always knew you had it in you, son. But what you've done, it's more than I ever imagined. You've turned this company into something bigger than both of us." Marcus nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. "It's not just me, Dad. It's everyone. The employees, the passengers, even Rachel. They've all played a part." Harold raised his glass of wine. "To Skyline, may it always soar higher. The future takes flight." As the months turned into years, Skyline Airlines became a global leader not just in aviation, but also in cultural transformation. Other companies, both within and outside the industry, began adopting similar programs, citing Skyline as their inspiration. Marcus, ever the visionary, continued to innovate. He launched initiatives focused on sustainability, aiming to make Skyline one of the first carbon-neutral airlines in the world. He also expanded the Wings of Inclusion campaign to partner with international organizations, spreading its message of empathy and respect far and wide. But through it all, Marcus never lost sight of the lesson that had started it all: the importance of seeing people for who they truly were. It was a lesson he carried with him every day, from the boardroom to the cockpit, and one he was determined to pass on to the next generation. As a new fleet of Skyline planes took to the skies, each adorned with the campaign's motto, "Together, we fly higher," Marcus watched from the ground, his heart full of hope. The ripple had become a wave, and the wave was changing the world. For Marcus Daniels, the sky was no longer the limit, it was just the beginning.